Thomas Gage was a British general, best known for his many years of service in North America, including his role as military commander in the early days of the American Revolution. Born to an aristocratic family in England, he entered military service, seeing action in the French and Indian War, where he served alongside his future opponent George Washington in the 1755 Battle of the Monongahela. After the fall of Montreal in 1760, he was named its military governor. During this time he did not distinguish himself militarily, but proved himself to be a competent administrator. From 1763 to 1775 he served as Commander-in-Chief of the British forces in North America, overseeing the British response to the 1763 Pontius Rebellion. In 1774 he was also appointed the military governor of the province of Massachusetts Bay, with instructions to implement the Intolerable Acts, punishing Massachusetts for the Boston Tea Party. His attempts to seize military stores of Patriot militias in April 1775 sparked the battles of Lexington and Concord, beginning the American War of Independence. After the Pyrrhic victory in the June Battle of Bunker Hill, he was replaced by General William Howe in October 1775, and returned to Britain. Early life. Thomas Gage was born on 10 March 1718 19th and christened 31 March 1719 at Westminster St. James, Middlesex, England, son of Thomas Gage, 1st Viscount Gage and Benedicta Maria Theresa Hall. Firle Place, Firle, Sussex, is where the Gage family had been seated since the 15th century. His father, Thomas Gage, 1st Viscount Gage, was a noted nobleman given titles in Ireland. Thomas Gage had 3 children, of whom Thomas was the second. The first son, William Hall Gage, 2nd Viscount Gage, was born 6 January 1717 18th and christened 29 January 1717 18th, also at Westminster St. James. In 1728 Gage began attending the prestigious Westminster School, where he met such figures as John Burgoyne, Richard Howe, Francis Bernard, and George Germain. Despite the family's long history of Catholicism, Viscount Gage had adopted the Anglican Church in 1715. During his school years, Thomas the Younger became firmly attached to the latter church. He eventually developed a dislike for the Roman Catholic Church that became evident in later years. After graduating from Westminster in 1736, there is no record of Gage's activities until he joined the British Army, eventually receiving a commission as ensign. His early duties consisted of recruiting in Yorkshire. In January 1741 he purchased a lieutenant's commission in the 1st Northampton Regiment, where he stayed until May 1742, when he transferred to Batterose Regiment with the rank of captain-lieutenant. Gage received promotion to captain in 1743, and saw action in the War of the Austrian Succession with British forces in Flanders, where he served as aide-de-camp to the Earl of Albemarle in the Battle of Fontenoy. He saw further service in the Second Jacobite Uprising, which culminated in the 1746 Battle of Culloden. From 1747 to 1748, Gage saw action under Albemarle in the Low Countries. In 1748 he purchased a major's commission and transferred to the 55th Foot Regiment. The regiment was stationed in Ireland from 1748 to 1755. Gage was promoted to lieutenant colonel in March 1751. During his early service years, he spent leisure time at White's Club, where he was a member, and occasionally travelled, going at least as far as Paris, Mexico. He was a popular figure in the army and at the club, even though he neither liked alcohol nor gambled very much. His friendships spanned class and nobility. Charles Lee once wrote to Gage, "I respected your understanding, liked your manners and perfectly adored the qualities of your heart." Gage also made some important political connections, forming relationships with important figures like Lord Barrington, the future Secretary at War, and Geoffrey Amherst. a man roughly his age who rose to great heights in the French and Indian War. In 1750, Gage became engaged to a lady of rank and fortune, whom he persuaded to yield her hand in an honorable way. The engagement was eventually broken, leaving Gage broken-hearted. In 1753, both Gage and his father stood for seats in Parliament. Both lost in the April 1754 election, even though his father had been a member of Parliament for some years prior. They both contested the results, but his father died soon after, and Gage withdrew his protest in early 1755, as his regiment was being sent to America following the outbreak of the French and Indian War. In 1755, Gage's regiment was sent to North America as part of General Braddock's expeditionary force, whose objective was the expulsion of French forces from the Ohio Country, territory disputed between French and British colonies where there had been military clashes in 1754. On this expedition, Gage's regiment was in the vanguard of the troops when they came upon a company of French and Indians who were trying to set up an ambush. This skirmish began the Battle of the Monongahela, in which Braddock was mortally wounded, and George Washington distinguished himself for his courage under fire and his leadership in organizing the retreat. The commander of the 44th, Colonel Sir Peter Halkett, was one of many officers killed in the battle, and Gage, who temporarily took command of the regiment, was slightly wounded. The regiment was decimated, and Captain Robert Orme leveled charges that poor field tactics on the part of Gage had led to the defeat. As a result of his accusations, Gage was denied permanent command of the 44th Regiment. Gage and Washington maintained a somewhat friendly relationship for several years after the expedition, but distance and lack of frequent contact likely killed the relationship. By 1770, Washington was publicly condemning Gage's actions in asserting British authority in Massachusetts. Creation of the light infantry. In the summer of 1756, Gage served as second in command of a failed expedition to resupply Fort Oswego, which fell to the French while the expedition was en route. The following year, he was assigned to Captain General John Campbell Loudon in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where a planned expedition against Louisbourg turned back when confronted by a larger French fleet. In December 1757, Gage proposed to Loudon the creation of a regiment of light infantry that would be better suited to woodland warfare. Loudon approved the plan before he was recalled that month, also recommending Gage to the king for promotion to full colonel. Gage spent the winter in New Jersey, recruiting for the newly raised 80th Regiment of Light Armed Foot, the first definitely light-armed regiment in the British Army. While it is uncertain exactly when he met the Campbells, his choice of the Brunswick area may well have been motivated by his interest in Margaret Kemble, a well-known beauty of the area, a descendant of the Schuyler family, and the granddaughter of New York Mayor Stephanus Van Cortlandt. Recruiting and courtship were both successful. By February 1758, Gage was in Albany, preparing for that year's campaign, and he and Margaret were married on the 8th of December of that year. The campaign for which Gage went to Albany culminated in the disastrous Battle of Carillon, in which 16,000 British forces were defeated by barely 4,000 French forces. Gage, whose regiment was in the British vanguard, was again wounded in that battle, in which the British suffered more than 2,000 casualties. Gage, who had been brevetted a brigadier general for the 1758 campaign, received in 1759 a full promotion to the position, largely through the political maneuvering of his brother, Lord Gage. Failure to act against La Galette, the new general was placed in command of the Albany post, serving under Major General Jeffrey Amherst. In 1759, shortly after capturing Ticonderoga without a fight, General Amherst learned of the death of General John Prideaux, whose expedition had captured Fort Niagara. Amherst then ordered Gage to take Prideaux's place, and to take Fort de la Présentation at the mouth of the Oswegatchie River on Lake Ontario. When Amherst learned that the French had also abandoned Fort St. Frederick, he sent a messenger after Gage with more explicit instructions to capture La Galette and then, if at all possible, to advance on Montreal. When Gage arrived at Oswego, which had been captured in July by troops under Frederick Haldimand's command, he surveyed the situation, and decided that it was not prudent to move against La Galette. Expected reinforcements from Fort Duquesne had not arrived, the French military strength at La Galette was unknown, and its strength near Montreal was believed to be relatively high. Gage, believing an attack on La Galette would not gain any significant advantage, decided against action, and sent Amherst a message outlining his reasons. Although there was no immediate censure from either Amherst or the government, Amherst was incensed at the failure, and Gage's troops were in the rear of Amherst's army in the 1760 expedition that resulted in Montreal's surrender. Early governorship. After the French surrender, Amherst named Gage the military governor of Montreal, a task Gage found somewhat thankless, because it involved the minute details of municipal governance along with the administration of the military occupation. He was also forced to deal with civil litigation, and manage trade with the Indians in the Great Lakes region, where traders disputed territorial claims, and quarreled with the Indians. Margaret came to stay with him in Montreal, and that is where his first two children, Harry, the future 3rd Viscount Gage, and Maria Theresa, were born. In 1761, he was promoted to Major General, and in 1762, again with the assistance of his brother, was placed in command of the 22nd Regiment, which assured a command even in peacetime. By all accounts, Gage appeared to be a fair administrator, respecting people's lives and property, although he had a healthy distrust of the landowning seigneurs and of the Roman Catholic clergy, who he viewed as intriguers for the French. When peace was announced following the 1763 Treaty of Paris, Gage began lobbying for another posting, as he was very much tired of this cursed climate, and I must be bribed very high to stay here any longer. In October 1763 the good news arrived that he would act as Commander-in-Chief of North America while Amherst was on leave in Britain. He immediately left Montreal, and took over Amherst's command in New York on 17 November 1763. When he did so, he inherited the job of dealing with the Indian uprising known as Pontius Rebellion. Pontius Rebellion. Following the conquest of New France, Amherst, who had little respect for Indians, instituted policies that severely hampered British-Indian relations, principally forbidding the sale of ammunition to them, combined with widespread concern about British expansion into their territories. This prompted the tribes of the Ohio Country and the formerly French Pays d'Enau to rise against the British. In May 1763, under the leadership of the Ottawa leader Pontiac, they launched a series of attacks on lightly garrisoned British frontier forts, successfully driving the British from some, threatening others, and also terrorizing the settlers in those areas. Hoping to end the conflict diplomatically, Gage ordered Colonel John Bradstreet and Colonel Henry Bouquet out on military expeditions, and also ordered Sir William Johnson to engage in peace negotiations. Johnson negotiated the Treaty of Fort Niagara in the summer of 1764 with some of the disaffected tribes, and Colonel Bouquet negotiated a ceasefire of sorts in October 1764, which resulted in another peace treaty finalized by Johnson in 1765. In 1765, the 42nd Royal Highland Regiment finally got through to Fort Cavendish, the last fort still in French hands. The conflict was not fully resolved until Pontiac himself traveled to Fort Ontario and signed a formal treaty with Johnson in July 1766. securing his position when General Amherst left North America in 1763. It was on a leave of absence from his position as commander-in-chief. Intrigues of other high-ranking officers, especially Robert Monckton and his supporters, for his officers, continued throughout his tenure as commander-in-chief. Gage was promoted to lieutenant general in 1771. In 1767, Gage ordered the arrest of Major Robert Rogers, the former leader of Rogers Rangers, who Gage had come to dislike and distrust during the war. The arrest was based on flimsy evidence that Rogers might have been engaging in a treasonous relationship with the French. He was acquitted in a 1768 court-martial. Gage spent most of his time as commander-in-chief, the most powerful office in British America, in and around New York City. Although Gage was burdened by the administrative demands of managing a territory that spanned the entirety of North America east of the Mississippi River, the Gages clearly relished life in New York, actively participating in the social scene. Although his position gave him the opportunity to make financial arrangements that might have lined the pockets of high-ranking officers at the expense of the military purse, there is little evidence that he engaged in any significant improper transactions. In addition to the handsome sum of £10 per day as commander-in-chief, he received a variety of other stipends, including his colonel's salary, given for leading his regiment. These funds made it possible to send all of the Gage children to school in England. If Gage did not dip his hand unnecessarily in the public till, he did engage in the relatively common practices of nepotism and political favoritism. In addition to securing advantageous positions for several people named Gage or Kemble, he also apparently assisted in the placement of some of his friends and political supporters, or their children. Rising colonial tension during Gage's administration. Political tensions rose throughout the American colonies. As a result, Gage began withdrawing troops from the frontier to fortify urban centers like New York City and Boston. As the number of soldiers stationed in cities grew, the need to provide adequate food and housing for these troops became urgent. Parliament passed the Quartering Act of 1765, permitting British troops to be quartered in private residences. Gage's thoughts on the reasons for colonial unrest played an important role in furthering the unrest. In 1768 he recommended the deployment of 2 regiments to occupy Boston, a move that further inflamed the city. Among the troops quartered in the city was the 29th Regiment of Foot, which had previously clashed with colonists in Quebec and New York, and had a reputation for poor discipline. This occupation eventually led to the Boston Massacre in 1770. Later that year he wrote that, "America is a mere bully, from one end to the other, and the Bostonians by far the greatest bullies." Gage later came to change his opinion about the source of the unrest, believing that democracy was a significant threat. He saw the movement of colonists into the interior, beyond effective crown control, and the development of the town meeting as a means of local governance as major elements of the threat, and wrote in 1772 that democracy is too prevalent in America. He believed that town meetings should be abolished and recommended that colonization should be limited to the coastal areas where British rule could be enforced.